Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Annie. First off, I know virtually nothing about the original musical, the movie, the comic strip. This is actually based on a comic strip, Little Orphan Annie by Harold Gray. And I don't think anyone who made this has ever read the comic strip. Maybe they did, I don't know. I am only seeing this as probably most kids will see this. So I guess it's a different perspective from someone who has a love of the 1982 film or the Broadway musical. But I do know musicals very well. And an old, traditional, big budget, everybody in the studio system is working as hard as they can. The shots are epic, the cinematography is gorgeous. You leave the film walking on air because you can't believe like all the cinematic gods have come together to make this beautiful movie. And Annie just is not that at all. It is directed by Will Gluck, and he is not the right director for this. He previously directed really cheaply made studio films like Easy A and Friends with Benefits, which were never films I liked, and I was kind of surprised they gave him Annie because he's not someone who I would think would be very good directing a musical, and he's not someone who really knows how to do anything really cinematically. He's a TV director, and I wouldn't even say he's a very talented TV director. And having that person do these big musical numbers, doing wide shots that aren't really inventive, they're more he's hoping to cover everything. Didn't look like he storyboarded very well. Didn't look like anything was planned out. What you have is a very cheaply and badly made musical with a huge budget. If you're going to have the whole studio at your disposal and make this hugely big budgeted, big musical that's a big deal like Annie, shoot it that way. But he shot it like ass. It's not like Les Mis where they have an artistic reason, which I thought was crap anyway, but at least like they had a real reason to do it. This is just badly directed. There's no theory behind it. Will Gluck shouldn't be directing musicals, and it's just poorly made. I have never seen such a poorly made big budget studio vehicle. This is remarkably badly directed, so badly conceived, not because it's updated. That's honestly not my problem with it. Most people seem to have a problem with this movie from the get-go because it's an update of something. And honestly, I don't think that's its core issue. Its core issue, it's just a really, really badly made musical. This is from somebody who probably thought High School the Musical was a really well-directed musical and thought that was the height of Hollywood musical filmmaking. And this is the kind of crap you get from Annie. A young girl named Annie who lives in a foster home, not an orphanage. They seem to not want to go into that. I don't know if that's a politically correct thing or what the deal is with that. Don't we still have orphanages? Do we not? I don't know. I'm just ignorant to that. But every time they mention orphanage, they be like, she's in a group home. They seem to want to update the terminology, which is fine. I don't care. But they did seem to do that quite a bit. So she's in a foster home and she is trying to hopefully one day find her parents. The woman who runs the foster home is Cameron Diaz, who plays Miss Hannigan, who's from the original. Although in this, she was almost in CNC Music Factory. I never thought I would say that this movie makes too many CNC Music Factory jokes and references, but like this movie makes too many CNC Music Factory jokes and references. So she is being a cute girl, Quasinine Wallace, so she's very charming. Get that she's a cute little girl and she sings these songs, and she sings basically the two most memorable songs at the top, and really the quality in the song choice gets worse from there. She continues living in this like weird movie New York, even though it's shot in New York, it feels very much like movie New York, and she runs into Will Stacks, played by Jamie Foxx, who is running for mayor, needs a convincing edge over his opponent. He stops Annie from being hit by a truck and it surges him in the polls, and his campaign manager, played by Bobby Cannavale in a really miscast role, decides he should have a photo op with her and they should have lunch, and then she convinced Will Stacks that she should move in with him, and she starts living the high life and bringing her fellow foster kids along with her to a movie premiere in which they watch a movie which at the end says it's directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller. I don't know if that's a joke or if they actually did. They do that, and then the rest of the musical of Annie plays out from my understanding with a few alterations. I don't have a problem with this being updated because I think they didn't do a horrible job in the adaptation process. The screenplay was written by Emma Thompson, Eileen McKenna, I think, and Will Gluck, and I don't think the script is necessarily the biggest problem with this. And having a black Annie and a black Will Stacks, Quasinine Wallace, and I'm probably butchering that name, but she has an interesting child actor career because most child actors become big off of a kid's movie and then try to get some sort of respect, and She started with Beasts of the Southern Wild, which is a really good independent movie. She got an Oscar nomination. So she's able to do like big, critically lauded awards pictures, but this is really her first like starring vehicle. But it's weird for her to do kind of like Macaulay Culkin, Richie Rich territory. She definitely has a different trajectory than most child actors. I actually thought when I heard she was doing it that was a perfect casting choice. A lot of these roles, it's kind of like how they adapt Shakespeare, and the fact that if you get somebody that's perfect for it, who cares? Like, she doesn't have to have red hair. And certainly, of all people, I'm a redhead. My wife's a redhead. If anyone's gonna get upset about it, I guess I would, but I don't really care because she's perfect for it. To me, like, she's this cute kid. She's one of the biggest kid stars in the world right now. Why not? To me, it like makes too much sense. I thought she was decent in the role, even though it's a mess of a movie. Same with Will Stacks and Jamie Foxx. I think, you know, for a musical, Jamie Foxx makes sense. The other casting, Cameron Diaz, it is a missed opportunity, and same with Bobby Cannavale, who has a Broadway background. I didn't really think worked very well. It was too much, really. And Rose Byrne was okay, but Will Gluck has all this money with Annie, and he could do a lot with it, but none of that was shown cinematically. This isn't a cinematic film. So then you're kind of wondering, like, well, why should I even see this in the theater? Some of the editing felt a little off. It felt like kind of a mess. Some of the worst editing I've seen in a big budget film, or a film in general, like unreleasable. It was so bad. They didn't really seem to know how to shoot a musical. Some sequences were better cut in the trailer than this movie. There's a lot of wides. It was very ugly looking. It didn't have a cohesiveness to it. The direction was so poor. It's not cut very well. It didn't feel like a film that was overly supervised and put together with a fine-tooth comb. It felt like he was very passive about directing this film, and this film was directed in a very passive way. And musicals are very intense and emotional, have hyper emotions that are supposed to lift you off your feet and make you believe in things that are completely unrealistic. And this film just couldn't do that. And Annie's one of the most well-known musicals of all time, and this is kind of the treatment you give it. This film wasn't very interesting to watch. It was just poorly made. It clearly like didn't have an eye for detail whatsoever. The fact that this is Sony's big musical, it's a joke. Like, this studio makes some of the most horribly made major studio films. Like, between this and The Amazing Spider-Man 2, some really poorly made films that have nothing to do with cohesiveness and making a really strong movie. How did the same studio that made this and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 make the Lego Movie? I have no idea, but this is one of the worst made musicals I've seen. Maybe Cameron Diaz was a little weird, but it had a cast that could have worked for it, and they didn't know how to do it. It seemed like it was too like interested in being like a movie. It was like very movie New York. It was very almost like an early 2000s film. It's weird that they shot on the streets of New York, but it feels like it was made in Toronto. It was directed by someone who has no understanding of nuance and doesn't understand how to make a big musical. Will Gluck is honestly one of the worst directors working in Hollywood on a technical level. He makes shit movies that are badly made and awful, and it doesn't envelop me in the fantasy of it. It's so terribly made, it makes me just want to hate it. It won't let me get into the fantasy of it. It's like he doesn't care enough. He doesn't really like movies. Will Gluck is one of the few directors who, if someone told me he was a fan of a certain director, I would be shocked, because I don't see any love for filmmaking in this. He's not a smart director. He's a shit hack studio director in the worst way, and he made a shit movie out of Annie, and it's so disappointing because it's like you could have made something good. Cousin Wallace's Annie, that should have worked. The ideas of it aren't entirely bad. It's just the direction kills this movie, and the songs get worse and worse. I don't know what's from the original musical and what's not, but it felt like it just got more hideous and tenuous to get through as I kept watching it. It was just ungodly how long this movie felt. This was one of the hardest films to get through, and probably one of the worst films I've seen all year. There's just like nothing in this that's good, because the director reached out and took any love and joy out of a kid's musical and just threw it out because he couldn't take the time to make a good Annie movie. Continues me questioning a studio that makes such badly made big studio movies. You're supposed to love big studio movies. You're supposed to be impressed by the production and how they made a big studio film. And that's honestly what a musical like Annie should be. And it's not. It just fails. There's no theory behind how it was made. It's just a shit movie, and it's a badly made one. And that's what you get from Annie. Sony's given me two of my biggest disappointments of the entire film going year, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and this. I don't get the sense that they care about filmmaking, and this director doesn't care about filmmaking. And frankly, I don't care for his fucking filmmaking, because this movie is just plain awful. So if you've seen Annie and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.